camp of the Syrians, and when they had got to the outskirts of the Syrian camp, to their surprise, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the army of the Syrians to hear the noise of chariots and the noise of horses, the noise of great army. So they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of Hittites and the kings of Egyptians to attack us." Therefore they arose the field at will.
They arose and fled.
They arose and fled at twilight, and their donkeys and left the camp intact. Their tents, their horses, and their donkeys, and they fled for their lives.
Verse 8.
And when these lepers came to the outskirts for the camp, they went into one tent and ate and drank and carried from it silver and gold and clothing and went and hid them. Then they came back and entered another tent and carried some from there also. And he did. Then they said to one another, "We are not doing right.
Okay.
This day is a day of good news."
We remain.
We remain silent. If we wait until morning in light, some punishment will come.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. So verse 9 says, "Then they said to one another, we are not doing the right thing. This day is the day of good news. And if we remain silent, if we wait until morning light, some punishment will come upon us. Now therefore, come, let us go and tell the king's household." So they went and called to the king, to the gatekeepers of the city, and told them, saying, "We went to the Syrian camp, and surprisingly, no one was there. Not a human sound, only horses and donkeys tied and the tents intact." Verse 11, "And the gatekeepers called out, and they told it to the king's household inside." Amen. So mukadde mu Kenya tudde mu enyiriri ezo okuva ku lusooka paka ku 11 mu Buganda.
Webalanye ssebo Bassekabaka ekyokubiri essuula 7 olunya olusooka okutuuka ku 11. Awo Erisa n'ayogera nti, "Muwulire ebigambo bya Mukama. Bw'ati bw'ayogera Mukama nti, enkya bunaabanga kampeka wano, ekigero ky'obutta obulungi kirutundibwa sekeri, n'ebigero 2 ebya sayiri sekeri mu wankaaki w'e Samaliya." awo omwami kabaka gwe yeesigamanga ku mukono gwe n'addamu omusajja wa Katonda n'ayogera nti, laba, Mukama bw'anaakola ebituli mu ggulu. Laba, Mukama bw'anaakola ebituli mu ggulu. Ekigambo ekyo kyandinziza okubaawo. N'ayogera nti, laba, oliraba n'amaaso go naye toliryako. Awo waliwo abasajja bana abagenge awayingirirwa mu wankaaki ne bagambagana nti, kiki ekitutuuza wano okutuusa lwe tulifa? Obanga tunaagamba nti tunaayingira mu kibuga, kale enjala ng'eri mu kibuga, kale tunaafiira omwo. Era obanga tunaatuula wano butuuzi era tunaafa, kale no mujje tusenge eggye ly'Abasuuli. Bwe ne banaatuwonya nga balamu, kale tuliba balamu. Era bwe banaatutta tunaamala gafa. Awo ne bagolokoka ekiro okugenda mu lusiisira lw'Abasuuli. Awo we baatuuka ku lusiisira lw'Abasuuli we lukoma, laba nga teriiyo muntu, kubanga Mukama yali awulizza eggye ly'Abasuuli eddoboozi ly'amagaali n'eddoboozi ly'embalaasi, eddoboozi ly'eggye eringi. Ne bagambagana nti, laba, kabaka wa Isirayiri atuweereddeyo bakabaka Abakiiti ne bakabaka b'Abamisiri okututabaala. Awo ne bagolokoka ne badduka kiro, ne baleka eweema zaabwe n'embalaasi zaabwe n'endogoyi zaabwe olusiisira nga bwe lwali, ne badduka olw'obulamu bwabwe. Awo abagenge abo bwe baatuuka mu lusiisira we lukoma, ne bayingira mu weema emu, ne balya ne banywa, ne baggyamu effeeza ne zaabu n'ebyambalo, ne bagenda ne babikweka. Ne bakomawo ne bayingira mu weema endala, ne bajja n'omwo ne bagenda ne bakweka. Awo ne bagambagana nti, tukola bulungi leero ku lunaku lw'ebigambo ebirungi, naffe tusirika. Bwe tunaalindirira obudde ne bukya, tunajjirwa okubonerezebwa. Kale no mujje tugende tubuulire ab'omu nnyumba ya kabaka olw'ekkumi. Awo ne bajja ne bakoowoola omuggazi w'ekibuga ne babuulira nti, twatuuse mu lusiisira lw'Abasuuli. Kale laba nga temuli muntu newankubadde eddoboozi ly'omuntu, naye embalaasi nga zisibiddwa n'endogoyi nga zisibiddwa, ne weema nga bwe zaali. Olw'ekkumi-n'olumu. Awo ne wayita abaggazi ne babuulira ab'omu nnyumba ya kabaka munda. Kyawandiikibwa kyaffe kikoma awo. Ssebo
webale nnyo ssebo, webale ddala. Totuuzi baako n'ekyokukola, sala amagezi. Don't just sit down if there is a need. Do something about it. Katusabe. Father, Lord, we want to thank you so much for the gift of love that you've given us. As we start to hear your word, Lord, may you speak through me, and may your word come straight into the hearts and minds of your servants listening now. May you bless us as we continue to worship you this evening, for this is our prayer. This is our Lord and Savior. Amen. Tetusobola kutegeera kyakigenda mu maaso nga tetusobodde kudda mabega mu ssula ey'omukaaga. Something was happening in Samaria. Indeed, Samaria was the capital city of Israel so many years ago. So Israel and Samaria in particular, being the capital city, was going through some terrible, difficult time, some very, very difficult time. There was famine. Famine not caused by nature, but famine enforced on them. Famine that had never been seen before in the city of Samaria. Ekibuga kino embeera gye kyalimu nga nzibu nnyo. So for okutegeera ekyakigenda mu maaso in this city of Samaria and indeed Israel, we have to go back to chapter 6, verses probably from verse 8. So there was a king of Syria called King Ben-Hadad. Omwami ono kyakera bukeezi ng'agambye kangende ku kutabaala ekibuga kino oba ensi Israel. Ensi eno bw'ateekateeka okutabaala ensi eno, omanyi baba ne ba servants, baba ne ba advisors. Olunyiri olw'omunaana mu ssuula y'omukaaga lutugamba nti the king of Syria went to war with Israel. N'agamba bakama be nti wano ngenda oteeka kampu yange. Naye abooluganda olunyiri olw'okuddako olw'omwenda lutugamba in chapter 6 of 2 Kings, chapter 6 verse 9, he says that chapter 6 enegamba olunyiri olw'omwenda lutugamba nti Mukama Katonda yalabikira, he revealed what was going to happen to Israel. He revealed the plan, the king's plan, to his servant, Prophet Elisha. Prophet Elisha goes straight to the king of Israel and tells him of the plot to come and fight his country. As any leader, as any person who is responsible for prepared, the Bible tells us that he sent his servants to go and check on the place that Elisha told him about, to go and see what's going to happen there. And, you know, as a servant of God, he went on to make arrangements to keep his country safe. The Bible tells us that in verse 10, that the king of Israel sent some men to a place of which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned him, and he was watchful there, not just once, but twice. Is it relevant today to just sit down and do nothing? Or is it, whether good news or bad news, to just sit down and do nothing? Is praying relevant to us today? Nowadays, young people, they don't think praying is relevant at all, or even carrying a Bible, reading the Bible is relevant at all. But here we see God is still in action. The man of God has had the bad news that somebody is coming to attack you. He didn't just sit down. He went straight and reported the matter to somebody responsible. You see, friends, sometimes we make plans. Sometimes we make bad plans against fellow men. Sometimes we plan to attack fellow people, fellow human beings. But verse 9 tells us that God, the man of God, that means God revealed it to Elisha. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 54, that no weapon formed against God's people shall prosper. It is Isaiah 54, verse 17. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. The Bible is telling us that the king of Syria came to know that the king of Israel followed his plan. The Bible tells us that the king of Syria, his heart was greatly troubled. The verses zitugamba nti neyeebuuza nti ani ku ffe ali ku ludda lwa kabaka wa Isirayiri ne ku ludda olwaffe. Ne mugamba si ffe, nti eriyo omusajja eri bamuyita Erisa mu Israel yategeeza kabaka wa Isirayiri biki byeyogedde mu kisenge kyo. Simanyi bamulaba Katonda bw'akola abooluganda. Katonda alaba amaaso ge. In fact, olunyiri luli mu Zabbuli essuula eya 34, yes, olunyiri lwa 15, nti amaaso ga Mukama gali eri abo, gatunulidde eri abo abamutya. The eyes of God are on the righteous, and his ears are listening to their prayers. Psalms 34, verse 15. Kabaka n'awulira obusungu ne bimusobera, tukoze tutya? In fact, as a result, the king decided to do something else. N'abuuza nti, where can I find this man Elisha? For just one man, the king sent a huge army. The Bible tells us that he sent, I think that's verse 14. He said, therefore he sent horses and chariots and a great army there. And they came by night and surrounded the whole city. Talking about the next few verses down, still we see God at work. God protecting his people. God fighting for his people. God keeping to his promises. Isaiah 54 is again coming into play. Now, Elisha is in his house. Elisha has got a servant. A servant is looking out, and there and behold, he sees a large army coming, chariots. Simanya mumanyi ku misinde emisinde bazita horses. Ezo horse nga zidduka emisinde zitali emu wabula nga nnyingi. Just for one man, just to arrest one man, you had to send a whole, whether it was a battalion, but it was a large army. The Bible tells us in verse 16 that in verse 15, the servant sees the army. He sees the chariots coming and is worried. He didn't know what to do. But lo and behold, he goes to his master, Prophet Elisha. And Prophet Elisha, as a servant of man, remember, Prophet Elisha at this moment, he had succeeded Prophet Elijah. Prophet Elijah, if you had to go back, he had just done so many miracles and, that story. And then the warning that came from Jezebel, he had to run for his life. Prophet Elisha this time, instead of fearing, instead of running, he comforts the young man and he tells him in verse 16, do not fear, for those who are with me, who are with us, are more than those who are with me, who are with them. And he says in verse 17 that Elisha prayed. Young people, is prayer still relevant to you today? Oh, do you say we have everything? Sometimes when you get everything that you need, you cease to think that prayer is important. Kugamba obivaako ebyokusinza because you've got everything that you need. Your parents work, you are at university. Is prayer still relevant? That Elisha knew there was a problem, but he didn't panic. But instead, he comforted somebody. He comforted this young man, and then he prayed. He said, Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Bible etugamba nti omuvubuka ono si kuba nti amaaso gaali gazibye, amaaso gaali galaba naye nga talaba. Friends, if God was to open our eyes and see what problems are facing around us and the many angels and the many, weapons that he's putting around us that people may not attack us, what would we say? The Bible says, verse 17, nti omusajja ono bwe yamusumula amaaso n'alaba eggye eddene eribeetoolodde nga liri waggulu. Behold, a mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha.
Amina.
Omwami ono yali atidde. But when God opened his eyes, he saw the protection around him. Friends, when we have fear in us, what do? Do we pray, or do we just lose hope? Or do we just sit down and cry? When problems are around us, what do? Is prayer still relevant to us? You are at school, you are being bullied, you are being mistreated, you are being called names, you are being, let's say, racially profiled because of your skin color. What do? Do you do like Elisha said, that God is bigger than all these people? Abaluganda baagalwa, Mukama Bayibuli etugamba nti teyakoma ku ekyo, n'ayongera n'asaba. The second time he prays, n'agamba nti Mukama bazibe amaaso. Bwe nadde netegeeza olunyiriri luno, that he made the Assyrian army which had come to arrest him, he prayed that God may blind them. Not because he blinded, they could not see where they were going, but he just made them disorientated. Omuntu ali disorientated aba atunula aba alaba naye nga tamanyi kifo kyalimu ng'alowooza nti oba ali London tali London. Oyinza okuba nga in fact kisangibwa nnyo mu bantu abagudde abana delirium, omuntu ng'atabusa obwongo ayinza okugamba nti ndi waka ate ng'ali mu ddwaliro tamanyi waali. Naye Bayibuli etugamba nti yasaba, he prayed. He didn't run away from the problem. The problem was there. He prayed, and we see that God's weapon is bigger than humans. Tulaba nti Mukama yamakinga abasajja disorientated era n'abakwata n'abakulembera n'abatambuza up to Samaria. Bwe yatuuka inside Samaria, the capital city of Israel, nga bali in the hands of the king of Israel, he prayed again. God opened their eyes. And when they opened their eyes, they knew that, oh, tufudde. They could not do anything because by then they were prisoners of war. The Bible is telling us that the king of Israel in verse 21, here we see that the king of Israel at this moment, when he saw them, he said to Elisha, my father, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them? But Elisha says, just imagine, these people had come to arrest Elisha. Do what you want to, do what you wishes to them. Many times as young people, we tend to do otherwise. You are being bullied, you bully. You are being abused, you abuse. You're being called names on social media, you call them names, you call them names again. And as it goes around, fight comes in. Fighting each other. Naye tulaba nti Elisha awa omwami ono amagezi, awa king owa Israel amagezi, amugamba nti you shall not kill them. Would you kill those whom you've taken captive with your sword and with your bow? Oyinza otya okutta abantu botte n'ekitala? They don't kill prisoners of war, but he says, feed them, give them food and drink. We see here that the king of Israel makes a big banquet. He feeds them, they are full, and then he sends them away. But as you know, an enemy will always be an enemy. Some of us, we are enemies of God. We are enemies to ourselves. We are enemies into our families. That whatever intention you just fight it. In verse 24 onwards, we see a different story. And this story is what leads us to chapter 7 verses, from chapter 7, 1 to 11. The Syrian king again, is not had enough. He's not done yet with Israel. Tumulaba ngaddayo, nga this time he brings the whole army. Verse 24 of chapter 6, 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 24 says, and it happened that after this, that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his army and went up and besieged Samaria. Teyakomaawo. This time yatwala amagye gonna, ate kuno yagenda ng'agenze kumalako obooluganda. This is where Samaria's problems start from. In fact, verse 25 wetugamba nti he besieged the whole city. No one could go out, nobody could go out, nobody could come in. Nothing could take place outside or inside the city. No goods would come in, no goods would go out. No trade, virtually no trade. The whole city was on lockdown. We know what it means to be on lockdown. You are supposed to stay where you are, tofuluma, toyingiza, abatunda kugamba. If you are being under siege, the whole city being surrounded by the army, just imagine that situation. Emmere erimu bagiridde eweddemu. Nti there was famine In fact, the Bible says a great famine in Samaria. And indeed, they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for 8 shekels of silver, and 1/4 of a cup of dove droppings for 5 shekels of silver. There was such famine. Simanyi wa mwali mulumiddwa ku njala. Naye enjala balenga yakulumye. Oyinza n'obanga n'okusiba wasibye n'owerabira nti osiibye n'olya. But just imagine the whole land and being surrounded. Not one day, not 1 week, but God knows for how long, for so many years, for so many months, and there is no more food. And this time, people are eating things that they've never eaten before. Can you just imagine eating bird's poo? Okay, maybe that's not enough, but the verse down tells us that as the king was walking by, the whole king is walking by in his own city, Samaria, and he meets a woman, and the woman is crying to him, King, kabaka nyamba, kabaka nyamba, kabaka namugamba mukazi, kabaka tondo w'omugulu atakuyambe, nze nakuyamba ntya. That is verse 27. If the Lord does not help you, where can I find help for you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress? Kabaka nga bimusobedde abooluganda. The king was also troubled. I'm talking about the king of Israel, the whole leader. I don't know about you, but leadership is not easy. Leadership is not easy. If you are a leader, you know how hard it is to lead human beings. Because for the king to just leave his palace, you would assume that in his palace there is everything, but he chose to go out. Probably this was a good king to see what were his people going through. We see that the king now, he pays attention to the cry of the woman. Abooluganda ng'oli mukulembeze, ofaayo nnyo okuwuliriza abantu b'okulembera. If somebody comes to you crying, pleading with you, I have this problem, is listening still relevant to us today? In this society, we are too busy. Recently, my wife, I think she prepared a drink for me. And when I came back home, I remember I was on the dinner table eating. And she must have told me there is drink in the fridge, and I didn't listen. I was busy eating my food and on the phone. And in fact, early in the morning as I was going to go to work, I always opened the fridge. I saw a jar there and I said, is this a drink? But anyway, I didn't pay attention. A few hours later, I said, I told you 3 times you had a drink in the fridge. You didn't pay attention to me. You didn't listen to me. And then I was wondering, why wasn't she happy since all night? Are you really listening? Do you pay attention to what they are telling you? The king listened. And when he listened, this is what happened. The woman tells him that yesterday we had a plan, me and my friend, that today that we eat my son for food, and tomorrow we eat hers. But yesterday we ate mine, but today it was her turn to bring her son, and she has hidden her son and she has hidden herself as well. Just imagine, I've got an 8-year-old son. I see my picture in him. Oh, thank you, God. It's been so many years having this favorite, love. I can't even take it out of my mouth. To eat your own son, that must have been so much. It must have been so much of a famine. They've eaten bird's poo, it's not enough. They've drank urine, their own urine, not enough. Now they've resorted to eating their own children. The Bible is telling us, as a good leader, the king was so troubled by this, what he had, and he tore his clothes, and it revealed what was inside him. He had put on sackcloth. Sackcloth in Israeli culture is a sign of public sorrow, public expression of sorrow. As a good leader, he felt the same way as his people. Do you as a leader feel good when your people are struggling? Do you feel happy or do you feel sorrow? Do you sorrow with your friends, with your family members, with your fellow church members? Wewe n'osanyuka nabo n'osanyuka busanyusi kubanga gw'oli bulungi oba onakuwalira wamu nabo? Abooluganda abaagalwa, the king tore his clothes. Does feeling pity relevant? Is it still relevant to us today? Oba ogamba nti ebyo byabwe nze ndi, nowadays when I look at what's happening, especially back home in Uganda, when people are struggling with COVID-19 and people are spending billions of money on cars and gadgets, when hospitals have got no medicine, people are spending much money on themselves. Is caring relevant to us today? Young people, do you still care? Do you feel that you need to help somebody? The king felt so bad when his fellow people are suffering. Are you feeling comfortable where you are? Don't just sit down. Do something when somebody is struggling. The king did something. We are still in the background. What was going on in chapter 7? What led to chapter 7? To these lepers, what happened that the Syrian army had to run? Abooluganda abaagalwa, tulaba wano mu lunyiriri olwasatu mu olumu wano, omwami ono kabaka alina kye yeerabidde. Kabaka bimutabudde abooluganda, abantu bamwe banasobola okulya abantu bannaabwe. How can this come? And he says there's no one to blame but Elisha. And he says that may God do to me. Verse 31, God, do so to me and more also if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains on him today. Mujjukira Elijah kye yakola prophet Elijah. Omukazi oli Jezebel bwe yamuwoninga nti obwenja obunaakera nga nkyali mulamu, omusajja ng'omutwe gw'omusajja oguli mulamu, ekindiko waakirina ng'ekindukeko. King Kabaka nabbi Eliya yadduka buddusi. He ran for his life. But we see here that the king of Israel forgot who the problem, he forgot where the problem was. He forgot who his enemy was. Sometimes tumanyi omuze ogw'okupushinga blame on other people. Sometimes we forget who our enemies are, and then we go and blaming other people. It could be in your marriage. Something is wrong in your family, but you are blaming someone else. The king knew it was not Elisha's problem, but he saw that the calamity that was going on in his city, in his country, was Elisha's problem. He forgot that this was the same man who came and told him of what the king of Syria's plot to come and attack him. Abantu tumanyi okwekyusa abooluganda. Tulinga ng'omwami ono kabaka. What do we do? Abooluganda abaagalwa, what do we do when problems come to us? Omwami ono akutte ekkubo, atambudde agenze okuggyako omutwe gwa nabbi Elisa. Abooluganda, we continue to see God using his powerful hand, omukono gwe ogwa ddyo ogw'amaanyi. He uses his weapon again against his enemy. Remember, we said in Isaiah 54 verse 17 that no weapon formed against God's people shall prosper. Verse 31 and 32, it says, this man goes down to murder Elisha for causing the calamity. But Elisha is in his house, he's in a meeting with some elders, and he tells her that as he's talking, see, God again reveals to him what's coming again towards him. That did you see how this son of a murderer has sent someone to take away my head? Elisha alabye. Elisha does not just sit down about Uganda. He does not sit down when God reveals to him a problem. Elisha tells them, shut the door, and hold him fast at the door. Do you just sit down when a problem has come your way? Girls and boys, young people, listen to me today. When things are your way, when things are not going against, when things are going against your will, when people are fighting against you, when people are just they're talking nonsense about you, do you just sit down? What do? We see Elisha realized there was a problem and he took actions. About Uganda, we have to be relevant in today's society. Today's society demands that, if somebody slaps you if somebody slaps you, you slap back. But as Christians, is that the way we should present ourselves? Is that the way we should behave? Elisha had all the means. He would have said the same thing, that God, blind this man, blind the king. But a few verses down, verse 33 tells us that as the servant of the king of Israel approaches, and the king comes, verse 33 says that while he was still talking with them, there was the messenger coming down to him, and then the king said, surely this calamity is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Abooluganda abaagalwa, kabaka essuubi lyonna lyali limweddemu. There was no end, there was no sign to the end of famine. The problem was still escalating to the point that people were eating their children. He had lost all hope. So, because he had lost all hope, he quickly thought of a plan. The plan was to kill his enemy Elisha. Kyendowooza omwami ono kye yakola, yalowooza nti onalwanisa Katonda, omukono gwange nga mumpi okutuuka eri Katonda, kanwanisa onandye okumpi. Tuyinza okuba nga naffe tuli mu kkanisa nga tukoze kyekimu nga kabaka wa Isirayiri kye yakola. Nti okasobola kulwanisa omukadde Bukenya mu kkanisa, kanwanise byakola. N'olemesa buli kimu. Naye noweerabira nti omukono gwa Mukama ogw'amaanyi gujja prevailinga mu buli mbeera yonna, as long as nga kikolebwa kituufu era nga kya mazima. Abooluganda abaagalwa, tulaba nga omwami ono Elisha, mu kifo ky'okukozesa ettima, mu kifo ky'okukozesa revenge, you are already entegedde nti ojja gye ndi, ojja kunzita, kankusabire Mukama akukole ky'ayagala. Naye we see that in verse 7, in chapter 7 verse 1, something happens. This is where we get the obubaka bwaffe we buli olwaleero. Tulabye nti in Israel, Samaria, there's a big famine. The king is troubled. The king has no plan. The king doesn't know what to do. People are eating themselves. They're eating poo. They're drinking urine. Kids are being eaten for food. He's troubled. So he's lost hope. And now we've seen that he's gone to do away with his perceived enemy, his perceived trouble causer. Gwe wandibadde gwe wandikoze ki? Wandikoledde ki omulabe wo? Wandimusabidde ebizibu bimutuukeko? Wandikoze ki? Abooluganda abaagalwa, essuubi nga liwutuweddemu, we do desperate actions. Sometimes we take desperate decisions we've not even thought about. Olw'okuwa papa, olw'oli mu buzibu n'opapa mangu kiveewo, abamu bagamba oba nfe. Sometimes people go to the end of committing suicide because they are completely hopeless. But when the king of Israel came full of nga talina ssuubi n'akamu, we see God showing grace to him. The king had come to do away with life, but God chose to bring lost hope. Abooluganda baagalwa, Mukama waffe wa kisa. Omwami yajja ng'azze kuggyawo obulamu, but we see God bring him hope that he had lost again. Ekyo si kirungi gye tuli. Amidst our turmoil, nga tuli mu kugezesebwa okw'enjawulo, even in today's society abooluganda, God is still relevant. In these challenging times we're all going through, when COVID-19 is, ng'atutte emirimu gyaffe abooluganda, nga maka gaffe gali mu mbeera y'okunyigirizibwa, God is still relevant to us. Ng'oli mu crisis gy'otayinza kutegeera, omuntu gy'atayinza kutegeera, God is still relevant. Young people, when the challenges are around you, nowadays we have challenges, especially probably around girls. This image problem. I want to look like this person. I am this one. Bengenda kusolo bankola kino, bampita bwenti, ndabika bwenti, ndi muwanvu, ndi mumpi, biki, image problem. God is still relevant. Tolina kuggwaamu ssuubi. You should not lose hope. The king had lost hope, but his enemy chose not to revenge. He chose not to do something bad, but he chose to bring a message of hope. Abooluganda baagalwa, tulaba nga Elisha does not sit down. He chose to close the door, but not to close the door okutuusa amawulire ag'essanyu. Chapter 7 verse 1 etugamba nti Elisa n'amugamba nti wulira, mukadde Bukenya nsonziremu olunyiriri olusooka n'olwokubiri ssebo. Mu 2 Kings chapter 7 verse 1 and 2.
Awo Elisa n'ayogera nti muwulire ekigambo kya Mukama. Bw'ati bw'ayogera Mukama nti, enkya bwe bunaaba nga kampega wano, ekigero ky'obutto obulungi kiritundibwa sekeri, n'ebigero bibiri ebya sayiri sekeri mu wankaaki w'e Samaliya. Awo omwami
nimukomawo ssebo. Abooluganda abaagalwa, mujjuke wano tuli mu kiseera nga kabaka azze n'obusungu, azze n'ekiruyi, musajja gwe Elisa, gwe wenoonya ensi yange, gw'ontedde ebizibu byange, oli maka g'okaaba, mukazi gwe, musajja gwe ondeetedde obuzibu buno bwonna bwe ndimu. Laba omulimu gwe gugenze because of you. This and that, you are mourning. You have come to fight that enemy number one. Naye abooluganda, Elisa tapanikinga. Elisa taddamu na busungu wano. Omuntu ow'obusungu tayogera ng'Elisa. Yamugamba nti wulira kaakano ekigambo kya Mukama. Omulabe wo ng'azze gy'oli, oyogera otya naye? Olaba obusungu bwe bukakkana ku musajja oli kabaka wa Isirayiri. Do you see how the king of Israel, his anger is suppressed because Elisha spoke kind words. He did not shout. I remember speaking to the young people that when somebody is angry at you, control your anger. Don't shout back, because when you shout back, you are going to fight. We see Elisha does not fight. He does not say you've come to murder me, but he brings words of hope. When we speak words of hope, bwe twogera ebigambo ebizaamu essuubi, newankubadde nga omuntu aliyogera naffe bannaye tuyagala kumutunula mu maaso, obusungu bukakkana. Abooluganda baagalwa, we should be able to be kind to each other. Despite of our differences, of our difficulties, we should be kind to each other. We see Elisha here suppressing the anger, suppressing. He knew that this man had come to murder him, yet he did not fight. He brought a message of hope. He brought a sense of reassurance. The situation was bad, but we see that he brings a message of hope. Yamugamba, tomorrow by this time, Uganda, it could be that it is 24 hours away from your deliverance. simanyi mbeera gy'oyita mu kiseera kino emaze ebbanga ki, simanyi kunyigirizibwa kw'oyita mu kiseera kino, but you could be 24 hours from your deliverance. Just remain focused. Just remain on your knees. It could be 24 hours, just 24 hours. By this time tomorrow, it will be a time of plenty. When it will be a seer will be a seer of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel. Kasente katono. Kitegeeza nti ekibadde eky'obusere leero kijja kuba kya it will be plenty okiba kijja kuba nga kya oba nkyogedde mu Luganda kwegamba nga kiringa eky'obwereere. Owooluganda wuliriza kino, togwamu maanyi, togwamu ssuubi. Kabaka ali troubled, but he received good news just at the right time. Oyinza okuba ng'onyigiriziddwa right now ng'oweddemu amaanyi. You know, abamu tebakoze for a whole year because of COVID. And you are saying, God, when am I going to get a job? Don't just sit down. Keep going forward. Abooluganda baagalwa, you might be just 24 hours from your deliverance. Just 24 hours to see God changing your situation. Just 24 hours to see God at work, changing things around. Bwe tugenda mu lunyiriro olwokubiri, somebody has told me good news. How do you receive your good news? Do you receive your news with skepticism? Or do you receive your news with thanksgiving? This servant who is talked about in chapter 2, yoli eyajja kabaka gwe yasindika okusooka mu maaso ge agende ewa nabbi Elisa okumutta. This is the servant who went first before the king. Now he has heard that by tomorrow it will be a day of good news. And what surprises me is his response to the good news. Does good news still do any sense to us? Some young people, I don't know what to say, but some young people, they don't take things, seriously sometimes. This man says that if God could make windows in heaven, could this thing be? The man had lost all the hope. You have tried your best to pass the subject, and every time you fail it. I don't know if you young people, some of you remember the story I told you of myself, that in my O-levels, I used to do well in all sciences except chemistry. The chemistry wajja, I lost all hope of passing chemistry. I was doing well in mathematics, physics, biology. English was very poor. But chemistry was my worst done subject. But I tried my best. And when the O-levels came back, even if it was still the worst subject I passed, but still I did much better than I usually did. So abooluganda baagalwa, this man lost hope of anything good happening. And when hope is all lost, abooluganda baagalwa, that's when problems come in. Your marriage goes, your relationship is just in tatters. You stop thinking of good things. You stop thinking of plans. You stop planning. You stop working because you don't have any hope. Abooluganda baagalwa, even though things are difficult for us today, we still need Jesus in our lives. God is still relevant to us today. The man says, can this thing be? See what happens, the cost of unbelief. Unbelief is costly, abooluganda. Obutakkiriza, okubuusabuusa mu bulamu obw'ekikulisaayo bukosa. Omwami ono, Elisha, amugamba, in fact, you will see it tomorrow, but you will not eat of it. We see what happens down below, that this man indeed, he saw that there was a lot of food, but because of everybody was rushing out of the city to go and get what they've had, to load the Syrians' army, bamutrampulinga nga bamulinnyirako n'afa. The cost of unbelief. Abooluganda abaagalwa, simanyi situation gy'oyitamu, but in today's society, where they say, bwe bagamba nti osobola okwemalirira, osobola okwekolera buli kimu, but when problems come, bagamba nti omulimu gugenze, duka osabe child benefit, nedda duka oyita job seekers oba allowance, byonna biganye, just sit down, they will help you. No, don't lose hope. Try and do something. Don't sit down. For today, it is still relevant to be an active person. Abooluganda, God is still relevant in our lives. When good news come to us in any way, Mukama ayinza okuleeta amawulire amalungi ng'alina gw'ayiseemu. Tobuusabuusa. Be thankful. Praise God. Tobeera nga musajja ono eyabuusabuusa amawulire amalungi agamutuusibwako. Abooluganda abaagalwa, we must have faith and believe that God can change our circumstances. It doesn't matter how long it takes. God can change our circumstances. Nga bwe mbagambye wali nti oyinza okuba ng'olina essaawa 24 zokka ofuna embeera y'okukyukamu. Abooluganda abaagalwa, essula eziddako awo zitusomye okuva ku Olwokusoma zyatusomedde awo, weewale ekinyusi kya leero. Tuvuddeyo eri abooluganda, tuve munda mu city eri Elisha ne Kabaka gye bali, tufume wabweru wa gate. Wabweru wa gate wano we wali ekinyusi ky'obubaka bwange obwa leero. See how God is going to fulfill his promise. He said by this time tomorrow, it will be a day of plenty. It will be in plenty. It will be a time of gladness. We need to be careful how we treat each other. Eri abali mu kkanisa abooluganda, nga tuyisa bulungi, nga tuteekamu class. Oyo bwe mulaba nga si mufumbo ne muyisa nti oyo muvubuka, ne mutamu ekitiibwa kiki kya deserving. In verse 3 of chapter 7, we see that there are 4 lepers. The Bible does not even mention their names. But one thing we know for sure, that outside the gate, not inside, abantu bano bali wabweru wa gate. Abasajja bana nga bali wabweru wa gate, nga bali n'ebigenge. Abasajja bana babalibwa nti they are nobodies. They were at the bottom of, they were at the bottom of the queue. They were being isolated because they had leprosy. They thought these men are contagious. Outside the gate are these men who are regarded as nobodies, useless in society, men who could bring disease to us. They should be there and die by themselves, die lonely. Abooluganda abaagalwa, abasajja bano baali wabweru wa kibuga, nga bafa njala wabweru w'ekibuga, wabweru wa gate eyingira mu kibuga, left to die alone. People, abooluganda abaagalwa, is this how we should treat fellow men? Is love still relevant to us today? Singa abasajja bano baaliwo olwaleero luno, twana tubalaga okwagala lwero in this society. Even today, there are people who treat others because of their skin. You are being denied a promotion at work because of your skin. You are racially profiled because of your skin. Bw'ovuga emmotoka ennungi ne bakuyimira stop and search because you are black, because you are brown, because of your skin. These men were profiled and they were mistreated. They were profiled because of their skin. But see what God is going to do. Abooluganda abaagalwa, it is still relevant today that God can use anybody. It doesn't matter whether you are young or old, you are a girl or a boy, you are 10 years or whatever years you are old, God can still use you. It doesn't matter bakuyisa batya ku mulimu gwo, God can still use you. Abooluganda abaagalwa, tukiraba wano nti Mukama Katonda mu nnyiriri y'omu Lwokusatu wano okuva ku 11, Mukama akozesa abantu abayitibwa nobodies, people who are being mistreated, people who are being segregated against, who are being isolated. Bali asimanyi bamutege ekigambo isolation kitegeeza. Olina COVID, you have to isolate yourself. Nali mu nnyumba munonzeka for 2 weeks. Nabula okufa, n'otambula ekisenge bisatu n'obitambula odda mudde mu kisenge wamu n'ogendawo nga tosobola kufuluma bweru because you have COVID. Just imagine day, but outside the gate. Abooluganda abaagalwa, wali obaddeko mu mbeera efaananako bw'etyo? Have you ever been treated like that? Young people, have you ever been racially profiled? Today, we still have such mistreatment in society when we are being treated because of the nature of our skin. But is racism still relevant to us today? Is love still relevant to us today? Is inclusion still relevant to us today? These men, abasajja bano, in verse 3, they say something very important. Mukadde Bukenya nsaba nsomera ennyiriri ezebbiri, olwokusatu n'olwokuna ssebo.
Biri okutuuka ku lwokuna ssebo?
Nedda ssebo, olunyiriri olwokusatu n'olwokuna.
N'olwokuna, olwokusatu lugamba bwe luti nti awo waliwo abasajja bana abagenge awayingirirwa mu wankaaki ne bagambagana nti kiki ekitutuuza wano okutuusa lwe tulifa, kubanga tunaagamba nti tunaayingira mu kibuga, kale enjala ng'eri mu kibuga, kale tunaafiira omwo, era obanga tunaatuula wano butuuzi era tunaafa, kale no mujje tusenge eggi ly'Abasuuli bwe banaatuwonya nga balamu, kale tuli balamu, era bwe banaatutta tunaamala gafa.
Weebale nnyo ssebo. Abooluganda abaagalwa, young people listening this evening, let us look closely to what's going on in these few verses. In verses 3 and 4, we see that these men clearly knew what was going on around them. They knew they had a problem. They knew that inside the city there was famine, one. Secondly, they were not needed inside. But they said, if we sit down here, we are going to die of hunger. But even though these men were faced with a dire situation, even though they knew that all is gone, we can't go inside the city, they don't want us there. In front of us, the army is there. But even though they were faced with so many problems, including the nature of their skin, they still had the nerve to talk about options. Do you talk about options when things are difficult? Have you got options, or do you just sit down? Listen, bagambye nti abasajja bano bali mu mbeera enzibu, but they still had hope, and they knew we had to talk about options. No matter what they were going through, they didn't just sit down. Tebaatula butuuzi waiting to die, but they had to do something about the problem. We need to know our problems about Uganda. You can't have a solution when there's no problem. You need to know what the problem is. Ononya mulimu. Go know that you need a job. Yes, that is a problem. Do something about it. Are you a young person? You want to be a lawyer? You want to achieve something? Work hard. Don't just sleep. Don't just be on social media. Don't just use your gadgets. Work hard. Find time to read. Find time to work hard. For God helps those who help themselves.
Amen.
They were faced with such a difficult situation, but instead of sitting down and die, they had to talk about options. Do you have options? Do you have options that work when you are being mistreated? When you are being denied a promotion, what are your options? olina obudde to review your status, embeera gy'olimu eyo ogitegeegeranyako. Oyinza okuba ng'oyita mu mbeera ey'okunyigirizibwa oba otambulira mu kibi ng'okimanyi ddala kibi, ekibi okimanyi nti oli mu kibi era ofunye ekyo kikolera. Abooluganda abaagalwa, abasajja bano baafuna ekyokukola. Now, let us look closely on their options. Abasajja bano baagamba nti waki tutuula wano ne tufa enjala. Abasajja bano baatunuulira nti waliwo obuzibu. Buyinza okuba nga obuzibu obwo maka, bufumbo. Buyinza okuba obuzibu obwo nga twagambye image problem, your education, your work, employment, byonna nga bikutawaanya. Do you have options? Or do you just sit down to wait? Omulala gw'onookubira akasimu nkolera kino n'akikolera. Nedda abooluganda. Abooluganda abaagalwa, omusajja ono Elisa bwe yagamba nti enkya wanaabeerawo ebirungi, Mukama yakozesa abantu ayense be yalaba nti tebalina mugaso. You might be there at school, and people, your classmates are looking at you like you're nobody. Don't lose your hope. Work hard and do better until you are better. Option esooka, abasajja bano gye balina abagenge bano bagamba nti if we choose to sit down here, we shall die. They say that if we enter into the city, there is famine. In the midst of this crisis, abooluganda abaagalwa, what are your options? Ng'ekkanisa right now tuyinza okugamba nti tunoonya kizimbe. Bagamba nti tunaagenda mu kibuga. Remember, they were inside and they were just out. Ne bafuluma ebweru w'ekibuga. But option number 1 and option 2, the first one that if we go back in the city, there is famine. We shall die of famine. And if we stay here, we shall still die of famine. And they chose option number 3. And they said, now therefore, come, let us surrender to the army of the Syrians. Abooluganda abaagalwa, ng'embeera kwetooloddeko, do you sit down and weigh your options? Twalabye nti first you need to know the problem. As a church, no friend Luganda, we have a problem. Do we go back? Are we okay? Are we comfortable to go back? Kyentegeeza nti, are we comfortable to go back and start renting again? Or we are going to say, let us all stand, let us all go forward. These men chose to go forward. They chose to go and surrender, for they knew that even if we surrender, they will either arrest us or kill us, or we shall live. No fan Luganda, let us say, let's go forward. We can do it, all of us, if we come together as a family. If we say we go back, that means we are going back to the same behavior, to the same comfortable zone. It's okay for us to rent. Oluganda, when we rent, you are a slave to your landlord. Everything is going to be upon you. Don't do this. We deserve to do much more. We are not supposed to go back to our old. These men said we shouldn't go back into the city. Ekidda nnyuma tekitera kuba kirungi abooluganda. Oyinza okuba ng'oli mwana muto, a young person. You are struggling to move forward, but you think going back is better. Maybe I was struggling with this subject, and you think, no, I should just go back to my previous. You need to fight and go forward, abooluganda. Bible etugamba nti abasajja bano bategeera obuzibu bwabwe. Ne bagamba tunadda mabega si walungi, bwe tunaasigala wano si walungi. Owooluganda ng'otegedde obuzibu bwo si kirungi okusigala w'oli. You need to move forward, abooluganda. Ng'oli mu mbeera y'okunyigiriza mu maka go, Don't sit down. Get up on your knees, on your feet, and do something about it. Young people, don't just sit down there and wait that God to help you pass your exams. You need to start right away. Those of you who are sitting SATs, you need to start right away to prepare. Is it SATs? I don't know, GCS is. Start preparing now. Olimo University, don't wait until third year to prepare. You need to start now. You need to go forward, Uganda. For God is still relevant in our lives. No matter how difficult things are going, God is still relevant. These men chose to move forward. They refused to go back, but they chose to move forward. Staying where you were is not good. And going back to your previous behavior, to your previous plans is not good about Uganda. No Fland and Uganda. Let us stay, let us move forward. We can do better. We can do better. Twabadde wano reading. Ne twegomba ebizimbe by'Abannagana. Naye nga tugamba nti ffe Bannayuganda tusobola kukyetuusaako. Abantu abasinga bagamba nti singa tetuggwamu buno tetuggwamu kweyawula. Now that we know okweyawula kubi, we need to do something about, my friends. We need to do something to prevent this behavior of separating each other. For we can do much better. God has blessed us with so much. We are more than enough to do to get our own building rather than going back. If we have our own building, brothers and sisters, we can do much more. Our pathfinders will have a place to practice. Our choirs will have a place to praise. Our departments in church, we have offices. When we have a place of our own, there's so much we can do. Let us say we are going forward. Let us not go back about Uganda. This is not what we are planned to do. Our destiny is not behind. Our destiny is forward. Ebirungi tebituli mabega. Ebirungi bituli maaso. Let us struggle. Let us fight to go forward. Young people, don't go back to your old friends who are not being good to you. You need to struggle and go forward because the future ahead of us is better than behind. If you failed a subject yesterday, don't say tomorrow I'm going to fight and you give up studying hard. Continue struggling. I had to fight hard to pass chemistry. If I just gave up, I would have still failed it. Abasajja bano tubalabanga, they've made a decision to go forward. And we know that in verse 5, they said that very early in the morning, at twilight, they wake up and go to the camp of the Syrians. This is where we see God, that when we are determined to do something, nga tubadde okukola omulimu, ne tugukola n'amaanyi, ne Mukama abeera ku ludda lwaffe. Abasajja bano batambula nga bagenda okwewaayo mu mikono gy'Abasuuli. This is where we see a miracle. The Bible is telling us that as they went forward, God goes ahead of them. God walks. Katonda atambula n'ankya Abasuuli okuwulira eggye ddene chariots amejje ddene nga lijja gye bali ne batuuka n'ogamba nti kaakati laba Abamisiri, verse 6, the Lord caused the army of the Assyrians to hear the noise of the chariots and the noise of the horses and the noise of a great army. So they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has had against us the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to attack us. Verse 7 says, abasajja bano ne batya buli omu n'agamba bano bafiira muloge, and they ran for their lives. Abooluganda abaagalwa, if these men had decided to sit down, God would have done it in a different way. Naye Mukama yakozesa, God used the nobodies, the rejected, the mistreated ones, the nobodies, abagenge, to bring happiness. Eggye ddene eriri maaso gaffe abooluganda ddene n'okusinga abo abatuli emabega. Owooluganda you mistreated makaago, ng'eryakuyingirira, ng'eryakuyisa obubi, mbeera ki gy'oyitamu okunyigirizwa ku mulimu ogwo. Jjukira nti Mukama ejjinja lyalina mu maaso go ddene nnyo n'okusinga abo abakwetoolodde. All you have to do is to stand up and go forward. You have to do something, because if you don't do something, God will not do anything for you. Bible etugambye wano nti abasajja bano batumbula nti baba batuuka nti bagamba nti when they moved, God moved. As they moved, God moved. And at the end of the day, tulabanga amaje ga Isirayiri gadduka ne galiga byonna bye gaali galiseewo. Abasajja bano batuuse mu nkambi ey'Abayisirayiri. Abooluganda, wano wenzijira ekinyusi kyaffe. Right now, the theme of all this year gamba, I will go. Abaami bano batuuse mu nkambi ne basooka ne beewaayo ne balaba nti temuli kintu kyonna, emmere eri awo, emunyago guli awo, silver, gold, horses, buli kimu kiri awo, naye temuli muntu. Nga bulijjo ng'abantu kikula ky'obuntu tusooka kwekusa. These men were selfish. When God opened the door to them, to a door of plenty, they were selfish to themselves. Abooluganda, Mukama nga tukoledde ebikulu, Mukama nga tuwadde obubaka, enjiri gye tulina ey'olwaleero, are we selfish to each other? Abooluganda, oba twewaayo ne tuyimirira ne tugamba nange nja genda ntegeeze ku munnange oyo omukwano gwange ali ku mulimu, mukwano gwange neetoolodde kubaka obukulu nze bwe nnina. These men were selfish at first. The Bible is telling us nti basooka ne batwala ne banyaga ne bakwekako, ne banyaga ne bakwekako. Sometimes we become selfish as well. Like these men care about our own needs and our own wants, and we forget the needs of those who are around us. Especially young people, sometimes we think about ourselves first. It is me first, then others. But God wants us to care about others first. Love is still relevant to us today. In our community, we are going to have poor people. In our community, we are going to have people who need our hand. In our community, we are going to need to have people who are not as good as we are. But are we going to be selfish as these men? God gave them something. Just like them, God has given us a blessing. God has given us jobs. God has given us the places to stay. God has blessed us with so much. Abamu tulina pairs and pairs of shoes. But what have we done to those who lack? Abooluganda abaagalwa, nantera okumaliriza, naye twetegeeze kiri mu nnyiriri zino eziddako. As they plundered the Assyrian army, and finally, these men remembered, and they say, how can we be like this? How can we be this selfish? God has blessed us. If we wait until morning, something could happen to us. Abooluganda abaagalwa, Mukama atuwadde obubaka, atuwadde enjiri, batuwadde enjiri buli lunaku tuliisibwa. But what have we done? We've chosen to sit on obutako kye twogera. We've chosen to be selfish rather than sharing God's word. We have to say, I will go. All of us, we need to say, nja kugenda. Ekimpatiddwa ka sharingeko n'omulala abooluganda. They said that if we just keep quiet, something will not be good, something will happen to us. They had good tidings to share with these people who were perishing. Naffe tulina amawulire amalungi agogabanako ne bannaffe abooluganda abali eyo abali mu perishing, abatamanyi Mukama Katonda affe, abatamanyi kye tukkiriza. We shouldn't sit on what we've gained from God, abooluganda bagalwa. We had good tidings. We've got good tidings. Amawulire amalungi. Are we going to sit on it today? Are we just going to sit and look by? What is it that we are going to do? Are we just occupied with our own needs, with our own jobs, with our own families? Are we not going to do something about Uganda? We have the good news and we must share the good news. If we don't share the good news, Bible tugamba nti Mukama waaki anaakozesa amayinja. We must not just wish to go for less. I mean, North London, we must not just wish to go for less. We need to wish, we need to talk with pride that if God is for us, we shall get a place of our own. Let us not say, let us look for a place to rent. No, let us say, by God on our side, we shall get a place for ourselves of our own. Tujja kufuna ekifo ekyaffe ku bwaffe. Tusobola abooluganda abaagalwa, tusobola kuba Mukama ali ku ludda lwaffe. Naye tunadda ennyuma kitegeeza nti twesiga oyo gwe tusinza abooluganda. Abasajja bano bwetegereza bagamba let us. Bagamba let us. Unity is still relevant today. To do the work of God, tulina okubeera obumu. Omulimu gw'enjiri si gwa bakadde gwokka, si gwa mukyakagwa yokka, si gwa mwami Bulega yekka. Omulimu guno gwaffe ffenna. We need to work together. In this society, it's all about me, but unity in Christ is still relevant to us today. As we go through this week, Uganda, we have to be united to move forward. These men, they knew their collective problem and they had to work together to solve a problem. They didn't just sit in one position. They worked together. They encouraged together. Let us go. If they arrest us and kill us, we shall just die. If they leave us alive, we shall live. We too, we need to stand up and go. The Bible is telling us, go and make them mugende mubabatize mubayingize mu nnyumba yange nambayita mu linnya lya Mukama waffe nga tukola omulimu ogwo gwatutumibwa. That means Mukama waffe yatuwa ey'okuleeta abantu mu kanisa si abantu batono yaffe ffenna. For the youth or adults of Uganda, it may be that our method of sharing is different. Engeri gyengenda okutuukiramu Oluganda ejja kuba different. Engeri mwami jjajja Musembe gy'agenda okukolamu egenda kuba different. But even though our way of approaching things are different, but our mission is the same. Our collective mission of Uganda is the same. We all have something to share. We all have a gospel of God to share. The gospel was entrusted to us to share, not to just sit down and do nothing. It is our role to encourage that person to stand up. It's not our role to talk about that person. It is our job to strengthen that person, to stand up and go forward. Because this is a collective mission. This is the only reason for the Christian existence. Will you join me to pledge together, not to just sit down? But today, nga tukozesa omwoyo omutukuvu nga tukozesa nga tuzzaamu amaanyi ag'omwoyo omutukuvu tukolere wamu okugaba n'obubaka amawulire amalungi Mukama waffe ge yatuwa. Ekyo kino nga twebuuza nti is religion still relevant to us? Yes, religion is still relevant to us today because omulimu gwonna gw'okukola mu bantu gukyali munene. Nsaba Mukama atubeere abooluganda tuleme kubeera nga tutuulirira obubaka bwaffe, tuleme kubeera selfish, naye tusitukire wamu tukolere wamu abooluganda twale omulimu gwa Mukama mu maaso. May God help us young people that whatever happens to us, we will stand firm and work firm and be strong. Whatever happens against us, to work for the service, to work for the kingdom of heaven, to bring so many to join us. For the work is many, for the work is big, for the abantu ab'okuleetera Kristo bangi naye abakozi twetuddeko bwetuuzi. The work is big. The work is big. The fruits ez'okunoga nyingi nnyo naye ffe tukoze eki abooluganda. Mukama asaba atuwe omukisa, nsaba atubeere atuzeemu amaanyi that from today onwards we shall stand and work together. We shall be like the the lepers nga tukolera wamu niwabadde nga tunyigirizibwa tusituke wamu tufune options ennungi eziweza ekitiibwa ezitwala mu maaso teme kudda ku options ezituza emabega. Mukama aliwo omukisa n'obubaka obwo. Nkusaba mukadde wange Bukenya oyeza nange kusaba nga tumaliriza.
Amen.
Before
Prayer, can we have a theme song, please? And then we have a prayer. Thank you.
Happy Sabbath, everyone. I will be giving you our theme song.